You've all been studying the schedule carefully, and you know that the last time belongs to John Tang. And you might recall that in the talk I gave this morning, he was the first now. So the first guy to really do design research full up without faking any ME content. Before that, we faked ME stuff. And John's had a great career since then. And based on his regular interaction with us, we re-engaged John, put more emphasis on testing with users versus thinking about the user. We want to get these prototypes out and test. So John's got an interactive session for you. It's yours.
Great. Thanks, Larry. So I would encourage you to stick with your global teams because we are going to be working that. So either now or when it gets late, you'll need to rearrange and find your global team for an exercise. So as Larry mentioned, my name is John Tang, and I want to talk about I want to talk about use studies in design. And as Larry mentioned, this comes from some observations of how ME310 has worked in the past few years. Just to give you a little more information about myself, I did my PhD work here at Stanford. Larry was my advisor. And I did some studies of group conceptual design activity, trying to figure out what are designers doing when they work together in groups to figure out how to develop some tools to help support their work. Currently, I'm at Microsoft Research, where I am still focusing on supporting distributed teams. And I'll say a little bit more about my project in that space. But one perspective I have is that I have worked in industry since graduating. I've been in a variety of industry research and development labs. And actually, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this topic, because in my opinion, use studies in design is one of the most important things to learn about the design process in terms of practical impact in industry and in my career. I think this comes from observing ME310 classes over the past few years where they come to the end of their presentation. And yes, they have these very cool working prototypes, but I would look at them and think, gee, I'm not quite sure how people would actually use them. I'm not sure what would happen when they actually got the prototypes into people's hands. And I was often trying to ask for more information about any use studies that were done on those working prototypes. Because to me, I think use studies are an important part of the design process. It helps you iterate back, figure out, getting input from the users, helps you figure out what you need to do to improve, or how to make sure that you tune your prototype to actually meet users' needs. So I would claim that without user studies, design is not complete. You haven't had that validation that you've actually made something that people can use. So what we want to do in the course of today is focus on use studies in design. And just to give you some heads up about why else we should care about this, we are going to be looking, as you work on your projects, for documentation about what methods you use throughout your design process to make sure that you have tested your ideas out along the way. Even this upcoming assignment, we're going to be looking for people to document which of these methods you use to help get input from users. We're going to have an exercise later today where you'll get some hands-on experience. So again, I hope that this lecture will give you all that you need to use that time. And then next quarter, I'll be giving a lecture on more specific ways of measuring or observing users. Today will be sort of at the conceptual level. Next quarter will be more details about how you can measure or observe or test user interactions with your devices. And I would hope that as part of your final presentation, we're going to hope that you would be able to draft out a user study plan. I mean, once you have a working prototype, how would you actually put that in front of users, get it in their hands, and learn from the experience of running a study and going on to that next iteration. So those are the hopes for how we would like to integrate these studies into the design process this year. So, first of all, I'm going to begin by maybe debunking some myths about use studies in design. Things that sound good, but aren't exactly quite correct. Okay, so the first one, it's all about users. Does that sound right? It's all about users? I mean, there's a lot of rhetoric about user-centered design or making sure that you focus on the user. But actually, I would say that it's really about use. Not just the user. That is, how do people interact with technology? How do they use it? Which is bigger than just focusing on users. Another buzzword that you'll hear is something called social technical design, or social technical systems. That basically, the things that we build, the prototypes that you're making, are deployed into a social context, into a social system. And it's that interaction between the technology and the social context that really is important to design for. So, just a very, very simple example of a social technical system. Waiting for an elevator. Back when skyscrapers first became popular, a lot of people started complaining, it takes a long time to wait for the elevator, it's really slow. And it turns out that one of the more effective solutions, one of the more elegant solutions to this problem, is just to put mirrors in front of the elevator. So that they've got something, people have something to distract them, and they're no longer thinking that they're waiting. This is just a very simple description of how this is a social technical system. If you focus only on the technical side, you might think about, faster motors, bigger elevators, more elevators. But here, by taking into account the social context, there's a much more elegant solution that will distract users, essentially, and give them kind of an experience where they no longer feel like they're waiting a long time for an elevator. And there's a resource for a little more information about that. I think thinking about your own paper bike contest, I think that's an excellent example of a social technical system, right? When I was listening to some of the design reviews of the students, I heard a lot of people talking about the user. How is the user going to sit? How is it going to fit on the person pushing? And I heard the teaching team ask a lot of questions about the use. How it's going to work on the bumpy field. What happens if it rains? What happens if another cart runs into your bike? And I think that again shows you the larger context when you think of not just the user, but the whole context around use. And in my opinion, perhaps one of the most important parts of that social technical system was the referee, right? Which rules were they really going to call you on? What things were they going to allow? I think knowing what you know about that contest, you probably would design something very different, having gone through the experience and seen, what happens in actual use. So, just a very simple point that it's not just about the users, it's about the entire context of use. Okay, the second myth, it's all about usability. Again, a buzzword that we often hear, usability studies are really important to make sure that things are easy to use, but I would contrast that with being really about utility, usefulness. That is, usability is about how easy is it to use or how quickly you can accomplish some task. But utility is more importantly about how useful it is, how meaningful the accomplishment is. And there are lots of examples of things that are easy to use. Staples, a company made this sort of easy button that you just press, but it didn't do anything, right? And a lot of times companies get very focused on usability studies, bringing people into the lab, giving them the task to do, and measuring how quickly they can accomplish that task. That's very different from real-world use because you've handed someone a task and you're only looking at how quickly they accomplish something. That doesn't actually tell you whether the thing that you've built is useful and meaningful. So it's just another contrast to focus on the difference between And what you do need, of course, is both. Something needs to be both usable and very useful in order to be a satisfying design. Okay, and then one other thing. User studies are only for after you've got a working prototype. That is, get something working, that's the only time when you have a chance to get some meaningful user input. And that's actually, I think, what we're going to focus a lot on this year is how to integrate user studies throughout the design process. That is, at the very upfront, at the conceptual design, when you're trying to define what your prototypes do, that's actually the most strategic and important part, the important time to involve user studies. And that's what we want to focus on, some techniques for doing today. So, you know, the observation is that by the time you have a working prototype, you've made a bunch of design commitments that really are difficult to change. And therefore, the improvements you can make are very small if you wait until the end of having a working prototype to do these things. And what we want to think about is how to move that work up into the earlier stages of design. Okay, so what I want to do is describe some techniques for integrating use studies in design. We'll be fairly quick, I have to admit, but enough to give you an idea. Feel free to ask questions along the way, but this is what we like to work through together as a class. So the first one is personas, and you already had a lecture about that on Friday. So I'm just going to skip over it, or just kind of mention it. This is a very well-known text on personas in terms of how to create a user. And this is sort of the bullet list description of what a persona is. I'm sure that this was covered already. But a kind of a fictional representation of the user that you make real. I will add, I found this in doing some work on personas. And I like this summary of personas. First of all, you base it on real people. You make them as lifelike as possible by giving them names and pictures. And you stick them on the walls and you talk to them. And this is the crazy part, right? Where you ask them, you know, would you like this? Or is this going to work for you? You really try to involve them in the design process through a persona. And their recommendation was just to literally do this. I think that's an interesting way of using personas. So examples, again, I believe you already went through this, but here's an example for buying shoes, a persona. And oftentimes you'll need personas that represent different stakeholders in the process, different roles along the way. And you have to identify those different roles and people that match those. Okay, so talking a little about strengths and weaknesses of personas. Well, first of all, it makes the user real. It makes the user someone, it gives a representation for the user so that you can be thinking at all times, how is the user going to interact with that? And I think hopefully it prompts you to do the user research to figure out, you know, really understand what your users' needs are and what the context, what their world looks like from their point of view so that you can design something that fits into that. On the weakness side, I think personas are, you know, they're a fictional abstraction. And I think because of that, they're kind of an indirect way of representing the user. You don't get very much feedback from the user through a persona other than what you kind of project or imagine into that situation. So it's useful, but it has its pluses and minuses. You know, thinking about your paper bike contest, in that case, you were your own users, and so I think you were sort of living personas in that case. And that actually points out that some of these methods are good for certain situations, or they're better for certain situations than for other ones. So it's up to you to pick and choose, or to find the best fit of the user method for the design task that you have. So that's personas. The second one is what I'll call ethnographic observation. This actually is something that's very, that I engage a lot in, and was part of my PhD research of studying what group designers do as a group to figure out how to build tools to support them. This is a useful text that talks about that process. And I believe this came up in the need finding lecture that we had last week, where you were encouraged to really observe what are people doing. And I think in that exercise it was someone reaching for something in a home improvement store, but to really immerse yourself in that context and understand what's going on, what are their underlying needs. And sometimes, you're going to have to approximate the design target because you're trying to design something that doesn't exist yet. So you're going to have to look at something that's as close as possible to the target that you're designing for. And here, you just want to get a very rich description or a rich immersion into that context. I'm going to reach out for my little prop here. To shadow people that are doing it and record it, which we can all do with the smartphones in our pockets, either in pictures or in video, and then to review that afterwards, and to really take a close look. In my opinion, the goals of an ethnographic observation, at least for design, is to get a very rich description of what's happening in terms of what resources people are using to accomplish their task. That is, what are the things that are important in their environment that enable them to accomplish their task? And what hindrances are getting in the way? What are the obstacles? What are the things that are slowing you down? So I think in that exercise with the need finding, we talked about ladder, we talked about sort of motivations of the user. And this really, it's as simple as taking the time to really study and observe and get involved in the activity so that you can figure out, well, what are people actually using to accomplish this, and what are the problems that are getting in their way? Now, a special kind of ethnographic observation is participant observation, where you personally get involved in the target activity, and you also personally interact with the social context around that activity. Can't do this all the time, but it's very valuable when you can. And when you can't personally get involved as a participant observer, then it's very important to reach out to informants, people who are actively involved in this activity that you can interview and shadow and study in order to get this deep understanding of what's going on. And again, a citation, actually a book that summarizes many of these methods would be a useful resource to have, which includes the chapter on participant observation. Okay, so some strengths and minuses of ethnographic observation. I think this is really, really valuable for getting a very rich understanding of what the user's needs are. I mean, this is, for me, this was kind of my tool for need finding. And I think it's more immersive and more interactive than persona. But the problem is that ethnographic observation is very time and skill intensive. So, in fact, while I want to encourage you to observe these activities on your own, in a career this often involves working together with social scientists, ethnographers in the workplace that are actually very skilled at studying activity and abstracting sort of the main points out of that. At our work, we're very fortunate to have kind of anthropologists and ethnographers involved in the product development process. And also you have to be very careful about generalizing. I mean, because this takes so much time, you're going to only look at a few examples. And so you have to be you have to kind of check yourself to make sure that you're not seeing something that's sort of unusual or peculiar to the situation that you're looking at. You have to very deliberately think about how does this generalize to other situations. And again, it's a little bit hard to project the future situation. So taking the paper bike contest example again, I'm guessing that none of you have ever seen a paper bike dodgeball contest before you actually participated in one. But what kinds of situations could you have studied that would have been similar, that would have taught you something about that? Open up as a question. What would be a similar activity to examine? Dodgeball, that's right. And actually, perhaps many of you have experience with dodgeball as a kid, so you remember it vividly. What dodgeball's like, but other examples, things that would be close that you could have studied? Oh, okay. So previous one, although the rules changed a little bit this year, it wasn't dodgeball last year, if I remember correctly. So, but it would have taught you some of the kind of failure points in paper bikes and what happens in a real contest. Good example. Other things that, yeah.
Maybe basketball on wheelchairs.
Oh, great example. Basketball and wheelchairs is very similar, and I think if you would have studied some tapes, you would have seen some examples of similar things. I was going to suggest polo, another game where you involve riding something, or if you're lucky enough to be in the geek culture, there's bicycle polo, I think you've seen, which would have been very similar. Okay, so that's the example. You think of similar situations to the target design activity, and you study that so that that will give you insight to the kind of situation that you're enabling. Okay. The next topic is paper prototyping. This is perhaps familiar, where what you're trying to do is very quickly express your idea, using paper or any other near-hand prop, in order to in order to put something in front of someone and kind of move the papers in and out to see how they would interact with it. So you're really trying to simulate the user experience by hand-drawn sketches, or kind of taking props that you have nearby and using them. In the paper bike contest, maybe you just could have used a desk chair on wheels to kind of roll around and see what that felt like. Small scale models, I don't know if any of you did that for a paper bike contest, but building something in miniature very quickly to get a sense of scale and how it interacts. And increasingly, we're able to do this using digital tools, PowerPoint or the web, where you can very quickly mock up the user experience without actually programming a working prototype. So just some picture examples of what that looks like. Actually, I love the iPhone with the post-it buttons, just taped on top of it, and you just sort of switch those on and off to get a sense of. I think what paper prototyping is really good at is helping identify where are the really complex points, where are the points where a lot of decisions are going to be confronting the user. I think those are often places where you need to kind of focus your design attention. But over here, hand-drawn sketches of different tabs, and again, you can just sort of reorder as the user interacts with them. Again, you could simplify this by developing templates for like a mobile device, a phone, or a tablet, and just filling in different design elements and moving those around on paper so that you can actually work through a scenario of pushing through the buttons. So, it's important not to get too carried away with this. I mean, you could invest a lot of time in Photoshop getting all the pictures just right, but what you really want to do is just get enough of an idea to put it in front of people and get some user reaction, and again, to identify some complexity points. I don't think okay. I'm going to show some videos, but I guess we're going to have to hunt on that for a little bit. But just some examples where there was a videotape of someone using an iPad application with a menu system in a restaurant. And they would just, bring new sheets of paper that represented the iPad application as it changed through to work through what it would look like to actually order a meal on that application. Okay. And again, being able to do this digitally using PowerPoint or web, HTML5, Flash, again, to be able to quickly get a sense of how people use it without having to build code, without actually having to make it work, with all the logic inside. Okay, so pluses and minuses of paper prototyping. Positive is very quick, very cheap, very easy, allows you to do those design iterations in the conceptual design process. And it approaches actual usage. You're shuffling pieces of paper in front of people, but you're actually getting someone to go through or step through a process and see what it looks like. On the weakness side, it does tend to be relatively low fidelity, and therefore there's sort of limited kinds of interaction that you can do in a paper prototype. So the trick here is you just want to get through these iterations very quickly so you can keep improving or refining the design before you commit to building code. Okay. Wizard of Oz. So this is a technique of actually faking it. so to speak, right? You impersonate, you get a user to impersonate what the system would interact with you like. So this often means having a human remotely drive a computer screen, or somewhat otherwise create a user experience. Or another favorite way that I like to do this is to write out a scenario and have people act it out. Try to act out what would it be like to actually go through the steps of your user scenario. And that process will help you identify what's going to work and what's not going to work very easily. So just some pictures of this. Here you have someone, this is a prototype for a large display screen, a touch display screen, and they basically have someone else remotely driving the computer as the user touches on the screen itself. So it kind of fakes that experience. On the other picture, you can maybe see there's someone hiding underneath the desk and someone else hiding behind the wall, manipulating items to give that Wizard of Oz experience. Again, creating a sense of what this will look like. I'm sorry I don't have wireless, but there's a great, if you look up this quote, this URL, there's a great picture of a Wizard of Oz where they sort of made up a life-size iPhone tablet and had someone dancing behind it to create a Wizard of Oz effect of creating this Sesame Street dancing application. But I encourage you to look that up afterwards. Okay, so again, Wizard of Oz enables very cheap design interaction. More kinds of things instead of being limited to what's on the screen. Wizard of Oz, of course, is really great for voice recognition, for gesture recognition as well. But still, we're getting closer and closer to actual user interaction, but it's still limited in terms of the feedback or the realistic feedback you'll get from users. So, autobiographical design. And actually, this I might get in trouble for saying this. There are a lot of situations where you yourself are the user. Now, at least when I was in the design division, there was a lot of effort making sure that you didn't design just for yourself, because a lot of the situations, a lot of the projects that you're in are for people that are very different from you, and it's much easier to assume that the reactions that you have would work for all of other users. But I think there actually is a role. There are many situations where you're aware of the needs that you have, and you have an opportunity to do some design around that. And so we've given this the name of autobiographical design. I think there's some recent examples of this. What do you think Mark Zuckerberg wanted to do when he originally created Facebook? Meet other college students of his age and connect up with them. And I think that's an example of autobiographical design that had a lot of kind of generality. And I think also you see that in the mobile app market. Whenever you have an opportunity to create a platform, a developer platform that enables people to kind of scratch their own itch, figure out applications or solutions that solve their own problems, whenever you're sort of enabling this kind of autobiographical design, there's often a large market opportunity there. And so I just want to point out that sometimes there are occasions when you can kind of use yourself as the design target, and that gives you, of course, the most insight into how to improve or iterate it by trying things out on your own. And that actually leads me to another style, which we're going to call iterative under-design. When I shared this with the teaching team, this kind of caught their attention because we don't usually encourage students to under-design or underachieve or kind of go for the minimum. But the idea here is, what's the least thing you can do to get something working and deployed into use so that you can figure out whether this idea is going to work or not as a need. And so what we're really encouraging is cycles of under-design to just focus on one critical aspect at a time get something quickly working and deploy it into actual use and learn and iterate from that. Now, I do think that it's up to it's the designer's responsibility to iterate through and get to a final product. In many ways, it's similar to agile development or the sprints in agile development, if you've had experience with that in software development, where you just break things down into very small or bite-sized or week-sized chunks and move quickly to getting them into a working prototype. This comes actually from, it's related to some work that was published by Gerhard Fischer earlier on under-design, although his take on it is more like participatory design, where the users themselves become designers. I'm actually not recommending that so much as this. What I think is really important is this last point about under-design avoids design decisions in the earliest part of the design process when everyone knows the least about what's really wanted. That is, it's again about design commitments at that early stage when in fact you know very little about the problem that you're trying to address because you just don't have much experience there. So what under design tries to do is just get you through lots of cycles of trying things out, getting it into people's hands, and watching how people use it. So what I want to do is actually give a bit of a case study of a project that I've been working on recently at Microsoft Research, where we have used this iterative under design process, where I just want to kind of step you through what that process looks like. And the case is about telepresence proxies. So, as I mentioned, in my research, I focus on supporting distributed teams, and I'm actually an example of that myself, where I work here out of Silicon Valley, but because I'm from Microsoft Research, the rest of my team is up in Redmond, Washington. So we're geographically separated. And the question is, how do I stay involved with my team, even though I work with them at a distance? And this led to a line of research on telepresence proxies, where we started doing the simplest thing, that is, use a laptop to dedicate that to a video terminal and allow remote people to participate in meetings that way. And what we did is, just try it in everyday meetings. Use that as a way of connecting and figured out what worked, what didn't work. And each cycle we would sort of find one critical problem with what we were trying and fix it and then iterate again. And so we did these repeating cycles of just trying something simple, going out and fixing it, trying it again. So just to give you some context for what this looks like as a problem, this is a typical meeting at Microsoft where there's one person who's attending remotely. And that person is represented only by the speakerphone in the middle of the table. Otherwise, you would not know that there's a remote person. And as a result, that person often gets forgotten about. And I would contrast that with the telepresence proxy which we gave, which gives the remote person a seat at the table, sort of a video terminal on a cart. And I'll just sort of step through how we came to that process. So, just some context, the need of this problem is that there are a lot of what we call hub and satellite teams, where the team is co-located except for one person who's remote. And this is actually very common in companies that have a very strong kind of headquarters culture, like Microsoft. Or also because you might need to do some strategic hiring or retention, and that person is not where everyone else is. As it turns out at Microsoft, of the teams that are distributed in distance, this hub and satellite organization is the most common distribution, representing about 13% of the team. So it's an issue that we face a lot in our own company. And it is that asymmetry, the fact that everybody else is local, that causes this sort of out of sight, out of mind problem. And so what we wanted to do is create a physical proxy for this remote person that represented them 24/7. This would be the artifact, the physical artifact that would be involved in meetings. So it would be a video conferencing terminal for that person. But but also is something that gave the team some awareness of a remote person over time, in between the meetings, in fact. So, and I want to go on a slight aside that this is somewhat related to a concept that we found that's been used in military families called flat daddy or soldier on a stick, where you would take people who are involved in active military duty and you would create just a cardboard life-size cutout of that person. In a sense, this is a testament to why personas can be very useful. Just this flat cardboard cutout reminds you that there's another person who's missing, in this case because of military duty. And to do this, they would make these and mount them on sticks, and it often would be used in parades to represent that there are these military people that are kind of missing out on these families. But what we found was really interesting is how the families appropriated these personas, right? They started getting involved in family activities, sort of play times with kids, or these very significant events, weddings or births of their children. And so there's something kind of powerful about this persona representation, this physical representation, even though it was sort of a flat cardboard lifeless thing. Okay.
And we're going to try to do batteries too.
Okay.
Something will work.
Okay. We're doing iterative design as we speak. Okay. So anyway, it's a very interesting thing that even though it was lifeless and just a piece of cardboard, people involved in a lot of their activities. So we thought, well, if that's possible, could we do better with something that was kind of more active, something that had more digital technology capabilities? And so we started by just giving a kiosk to the remote person, a place where you could always go to meet that remote person, and some information, like in this case, it provides the remote person's schedule, so you can easily see when they're available to have a meeting and when they're not. And then we again went through these cycles of design, creating just a laptop and a table for the remote person. We added some other cameras, and then put it on the cart to make it more mobile. And I will just go through a quick video clip that will show you some of those steps. I'll apologize in advance for the kind of stiff acting, but it will give you at least the idea of the design process.
Our research interests were also fueled by our own needs, as our team includes 2 satellite members. Our setting provided an opportunity to iterate on the prototypes of daily use over the course of a year. To survive the rigors of continuous use, it had to be robust and effective. Like many people, we started with a laptop and a webcam. The setup was fine for smaller meetings, but didn't scale up. The built-in speaker and microphone couldn't handle larger meetings, so we added a conference speakerphone.
So we're just adding.
The webcam couldn't capture more than 2 people, so we added a fisheye camera. The fisheye camera couldn't capture the whiteboard interactions that often occurred in our meetings, so we added a remote control hand-tilt Zoom camera. We found that portability was important, so we put it on a cart and mounted the laptop at eye height. We changed to a larger LCD and mounted the cameras as close as possible to it for better eye-gaze awareness. We added a UPS to keep it working while reading.
Okay, so just a quick excerpt of the design process for our telephone proxies, and this is a variety of pictures showing how it gets used in day-to-day work. This is how I attend my meetings daily up in Princeton. And this is actually my favorite picture of the proxy because it shows the social context around it, right? It's not just a piece of technology that helps me in meetings, but in between meetings it also reminds people that there's someone remote, and it's really helping be part of the team socially, so that when new ideas come up, I'm included, or they think about helping me rather than forgetting about it. So, actually this is what the latest view of it looks like. Probably the biggest change is that we've moved the aspect ratio to be portrait rather than landscape, because in fact, that's how people are captured best in portrait mode. So this gives me much more of a sense of presence as you see it kind of pushed up to a table in a meeting. And more recently, several people have turned this into, or several companies have turned this into a market for telepresence robots. This is actually just a sampling of robotically driven robots that allow this telepresence feature that are available today. And I want to point out that ours has no robotics whatsoever. I rely on people to push this around from meeting room to meeting. And one of the reasons why we did this in this iterative under-design fashion is that we didn't want to wait until all the robotics problems get solved. Because, as you might imagine, there's quite a lot of problem in making something like this be totally autonomous, be able to navigate all the situations of work environment. So rather than wait for that technology to be solved, we just relied on people to push us around. It's a little bit of a pain, but it's enabled us to have usage experience of this over the past, actually 4 years. This project has been around for 4 years, and it's allowed us to refine this idea without having to get all the robotics right. Okay, so some pluses and minuses of this approach. I think this is the most realistic way of getting used to. You actually have usage experience, day-to-day usage experience, and get to see what works and what doesn't work. And you're learning as you go through the design process. You're learning much more about the problems, the underlying needs, the context and the social situation. You get to see how people react to it, which is very useful. I think the negatives are that this can result in sort of piecemeal solutions where you just you kind of add one component to solve one problem and you add another component to solve another problem. You could argue that our prototype actually shows this. You kind of see very individual components that, one camera focuses on one area, another camera focuses on another area, which is why you need to have kind of a pass-through at the end. Once you've figured out, once you've done all the learning about the problem, which is problem space, you can kind of integrate those together into a more elegant or complete design solution. So, and again, this is an area where you have to be careful about how you generalize, or make sure that you deploy that in situations that are representative of, much broader environments. Okay, so we've kind of very quickly gone through a number of methods for integrating these studies into the design process. Personas, ethnographic observation, paper prototyping, Wizard of Oz, and iterative under-design. And I just want to point out that, it's not that you use one or the other. It's choosing which methods, which combination of methods actually fit the design space that you're facing. So as you think about the various projects that you're working on, you can pick from this tool set which ones make the most sense for your problem. Hopefully this is enough information to get you started for doing this in your class projects. And again, I would point out that in your careers, your jobs, you often will need to interact with or collaborate with other people who specialize in this area. Social scientists, especially for ethnographic observations, or very quick prototypers that allow you to get those iterative under-design prototypes and how to use and observe how they work in practice. Okay, so, well, I'll stop there for any questions at that point. Or any comments, experiences? Again, you can reflect on how much things would be different if you did the paper bike exercise today, based on having that experience, based on getting real use experience, how that would change your design process. So what we'd like to do is move on to an actual hands-on exercise where you try these methods as a group for just a short exercise during this class. So what we're going to do is break up into teams and have everyone work on a design exercise for about a half hour, and then have you report back from your experiences. That is, what works, what didn't work, what was hard, where do you need more clarification about each method. So it's going to take a little bit of organization to break us up into teams, but hopefully you're sitting near your global team. The task is going to be to design what I would call a water cooler tool for remote teams. So in very much, this is a tool that would be useful in your own work in globally distributed teams between your work here and the global teams that you're working with. And by water cooler tool, I mean something that gives that ability to connect with your other team in a very informal, impromptu way. It's really important for sharing gossip, for sharing updates, that unplanned or informal sharing. How would you do that with your globally distributed team? And I think a special important thing to focus on is how you encourage social connection through this. So that's the design task. Does that make sense in terms of what we're trying to get done? Okay, so how are we going to do it? We're going to gather in your global teams, and we're going to break up. So that means that, if I understand the structure, every Stanford team has a global team, hopefully that's here. So you want to pair up with that team. For the global sugar teams, I'd like you to pair up with a team from another country so that you have that cross-country experience. And each of those teams divides into two teams, roughly half Stanford and half the other team. So let me use the Microsoft team as an example, because you guys are all here. You want to stand up for a second. So who's here from Stanford? Hold your hands up, Stanford folks. One person. So what's going to happen is that you're going to split up so that half of the Stanford folks are with the global team, the other half are another team. So you have two sets of teams, right? So for each of the teams, break up in that way so that you're evenly divided, so that you have people from both sites represented in each team. And then we're going to divide up and work on the task. Let's just get through the rest of it. Each sub-team will get assigned a method to work on it for about a half an hour. I'd like each team to have one person set an alarm. Let's say we'll make sure we get back here at 4:40. Let's say set an alarm for 4:40 so we get back here. Work on this method for a half hour. Just go as far as you can. Feel free to ask any questions of me and the teaching team, and then we'll report back. There you go.
Double check your understanding of the water cooler method.
Yeah, okay. So I did get some nods about this, but just a tool that allows you to very informally connect, both professionally, as in how's the progress on your team doing, but also socially. And one of the tests that I'd like you to try is, in your prototyping, do you actually learn something new from the other team, from the remote team? Does it enable you to learn something new about that other team? Any questions? Or?
It's just, I just try to do
Yeah.
it myself. So we've got a lot of different cultures here.
Yep.
And the water cooler is kind of North
That's
American.
right.
This could be tea, it could be the coffee machine, it could be the beer cabinet, it could be wherever you go and get your thing and you run into other people and they're trying to get that thing too.
Okay. So we're going to work on it for a half hour. Feel free to ask us or any of me or any of the teaching team for questions along the way, and be prepared to report back and your experiences. They did like a 5-minute report back about how things went. Okay. So first of all, I guess everyone just needs to stand up and make sure that you're in your team. Make sure you're